Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about President Biden's big Supreme Court reform package, which he's going to unveil today in Texas, the heart of the South, at the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. And I think he's at the LBJ Library. And so people will note the unintentional overtones because Johnson, of course, is the last president to step aside during an election year in the tumultuous and otherwise inapposite years of 1968. Okay, question one. Is this sort of serious, or do they mean to really make any headway on this, at least this year? And the answer, I think we have to say, is no. This is not going anywhere while you have a Republican House. And like other Supreme Court reforms, it's always going to be a very big lift, just culturally. Trying to get the Congress to change the court makeup is very difficult, especially as part of the kind of eternal political struggle involving the three branches. And people always cite the effort by FDR to pack the court to increase the size of it in response to decisions he didn't like. So that's the first. It doesn't mean it's a cynical election year ploy, because it is the kind of thing that he is also setting in motion. He hopes a process that over a few years will result in meaningful reforms. But I don't think this year, and I think it's no coincidence that the Supreme Court is as unpopular an institution, I think, as in U.S. government. So in other words, it's good politics to be focused on this during the election year, and Trump came out in direct opposition to it. So it really sets up a Biden-Trump or Harris-Trump. Harris came right out and supported it as well during an election year over an unpopular institution. Okay, so that's point one. Point two, Biden himself has been noticeably hesitant and reluctant. Biden's an institutions guy, right? He was in the Senate forever, and he's been importuned since he got into office to do something to try to reform the Supreme Court, especially because all that packing had occurred at the end of the Trump term. Merrick Garland gets totally screwed. Barrett gets ushered in at the 11th hour, and progressives already were fit to be tied. He resisted and resisted and resisted some more, did the classic government ploy of appointing a blue ribbon commission. So a few years ago, 61 scholars, many of the names you will have heard, studies it and gives some thoughts to them. I think not even any formal recommendations. So it's telling. It's no coincidence that we're toward the end of his tenure as president that he is now bringing these forth. Third, there are three areas of reform that are going to be in play. And that's in his proposal, and that's in his proposal because not in anyone. Because there's something that I'll get to that they notably don't do. But we got three things supposedly they want to correct. First, the whole ethics mess up and the Supreme Court itself just not being subject to any ethical rules. Kind of a scandal in and of itself. Justice Kagan in the last week called for some enforceable ethics rules against the Supreme Court. But Alito, most famously, but many of them have bridled at any attempt to impose ethics rules on them, as are imposed on every other office holder in the federal government. So this is all the Alito stuff, Thomas stuff. And again, it's whether or not it passes, it keeps a spotlight on a very unpopular practice that people are lopsidedly against. How did Justice Thomas, over the course of his career, get $4 million and basically a luxurious lifestyle from Harlan Crow, a billionaire with noted conservative views, et cetera? That's the kind of question the administration wants the American people to be asking. The second area would deal with how long justices serve, or how many are there. Some attempt basically to get at the raw liberal conservative problem that right now we have a lopsided court and a court in which every single confirmation becomes a blood battle within the country even. And that's because the stakes are so high. First, you have the quirk of some presidents getting 1 or 0 appointments, some getting 3 or more, like Trump. And it's that seeming unfair, but also they're putting in presidents, young, very ideological justices who are 40-something and will serve for that many years. Justice Thomas famously said, the liberals made me miserable for 43 years, the age at which he joined the court. I'm going to make them miserable for 43 years. And then finally, the immunity decision, which is a stinker on all, everywhere within the American people. It sounds bad, it reads bad, and scholars have completely lambasted it, so a very unpopular target as well. Okay, those are the 3 areas. And Biden announces his package in an op-ed today in the Washington Post. And interestingly, what does he lead with? Immunity and the principle that no person is above the law. So since this is largely a political overture, you can infer that the administration has decided, with all the unpopularity of the Supreme Court, this decision, the immunity decision, and the endorsement of a principle that the president is king. I mean, we've talked about it, I've written about it at some length, is the thing that they really want to most go after. So how do you do that? I talked about it at the time, the immunity decision, it's a little bit squirrely or less than clear. The Supreme Court does seem to put it on constitutional footing, separation of powers and the like. But really, if you push on it, that's pretty thin and it gives way. It really, to me, seems to be the Supreme Court's, or 6 members of the court's, own sense of what makes an effective government, a nimble and aggressive president. Not so much the Constitution, but it doesn't matter, because for all these things, who's going to decide if something is constitutional or not? The Supreme Court, Marbury versus Madison, 1803, no getting around it. So that means that what he's going to be proposing is a constitutional amendment to just make clear nobody is above the law. That's the way they would state it, and it would clearly be targeting the immunity decision. All right, the constitutional amendment route ain't easy. The last one that passed, honestly, had to do with Congress, had been pending 203 years. The 18-year-old vote, more quickly. Equal rights amendment has languished. You have to get 2/3 of a vote of each House of Congress, or 2/3 of all the states. And, purposely, that is designed to be really tough. And, I think it's not going to get out of the gate now. Well, I mean, they could, some states could pass, but especially with the current Congress, the current, complete division in the country, they can propose a constitutional amendment. It can hover around. They can try to push it forward one state at a time, or hope for bringing up a vote in Congress. It's a non-starter, especially to try to amend the Constitution. Ethics. On the ethics code, it's pretty interesting. That's going to be popular. Again, not this Congress, but you can imagine an ethics code passing. For God's sake, a justice of the Supreme Court has just called for it, but then there will be a showdown. You will certainly have some sentiment on the Supreme Court, Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, maybe more, saying, you can't tell us what to do. It's just not up to you, and it's a violation of the separation of powers for you to tell us that this is what we have to do for ethics, and that we can impose it on ourselves, maybe, and we can be polite and nice and do you guys a favor and follow it, maybe. It's a justice by justice decision, so that's what really makes it untenable, is that it's completely unenforceable now. And we'll see, should it pass, which it won't this term, but it will engender, I'm confident, a showdown between Congress and the Supreme Court. And, the story of the last many years, you could say, is the Supreme Court really taking power away from Congress, as they in fact do in the immunity decision, and especially the Chevron case, et cetera. Okay, that leaves what in some ways would be the showcase provision, which is this 18-year term. And what's that about? That's about, we've got 6 people, an uber conservative majority, locked up for a generation, holy whatever, fill in the blank. But, that's the biggest problem with the Supreme Court. That's what progressives are really up in arms about wanting to change. All right, the number one way to change that would be the court packing plan. Let's just put 4 people on. That's something we know Congress can do. Congress can just enlarge the court, and it has in the past. And progressives who have been really exhorting Biden for years to change things, that's really their preferred action, because right away it neutralizes the somewhat illegitimate Trump trio of appointees, and we know it passes muster, et cetera. So it is a very telling absence in the Biden proposals that is not in there. It is not in there, this enlarge the court. Instead, what is in there, the other proposal that's sort of been circulating, and it's one that has some notable conservative support, it would be like this. Right now, every Supreme Court justice has life tenure, or in the language of the Constitution, serves during good behavior. If they don't, if they're not impeached, and we've had recent efforts to impeach a justice, their pay can't be reduced, and they serve for life or until they resign. Biden proposal will be no more life, rather 18 years, a pretty, basically a generation. And so you wouldn't have this, blood battles that with the stakes so inordinate when a 45-year-old like Justice Barrett or Justice Kavanaugh are there to be confirmed, and they could affect things for a generation. So that's the notion. Let's make it 18 years instead. Oh, and what else? Let's just give every president 2 appointments per term. So, and that's how the 18 years would be sort of cycled. And that way, again, no sense, having these incredible screaming matches and really battles to the death on the floor of the Senate. Everybody's going to get their turn. Yes, this guy's conservative, but in 2 more years, there's another appointee. So it really very, very much takes the stakes away, the sort of death stakes away from each and every one of these confirmations. And that's the route Biden's going to go. One problem, this is my last point. Now, Biden doesn't talk about whether it would be constitutional or statutory. And recall, the Constitution says they get to serve during good behavior. They have life tenure. There is no way to do away with life tenure without a constitutional amendment. So double back to all the things I've said. There's an argument, a pretty good one, that is out there that goes like this. Hey, way back when the Congress said that Supreme Court justices need to ride the circuit, and they set their tasks and they can set their jurisdiction. In other words, they must be able to serve all their lives, but it might be constitutional, but man, it would be a Donnybrook of a fight. But you could imagine the position being taken. Now, of course, it would be in front of this court. Would they uphold it? But the provision would be, from now on, and I'll get back to from now on in a moment, justices serve only 18 years on the Supreme Court, and then thereafter we'll have them attend conferences and go to Court of Appeals cases, etc. Maybe, just maybe, that flies. If it does, however, it only could be for justices appointed in the future, because this line of cases makes clear that Congress can't go back and change the job description of sitting officials, okay? So Biden doesn't make clear whether they try to do it by statute. It obviously seems against the grain of the Constitution, but maybe it would fly. Same thing as with everything else. We're not going to find out anytime soon, because this is really A, political for today, and B, looking to the future for actual reforms. So lots of interesting stuff here. Nothing's going to happen during the course of the election except real focus on an unpopular institution. Doesn't mean all these provisions are DOA, but at least 2 of them, it seems to me, are going to, and maybe even 3, you could imagine, it would require constitutional amendments, and those are always sort of huge and sometimes decades-long social and legal battles. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.